Hello friends, this is Jim with Science Talk, and I'm bringing a story to you about how looking at the past helps us understand the present better. So the headline here is, past warming shows 2 degrees Celsius brink may be close. Now the 2 degrees C is of course what the nations at the Paris Accord agreed to try to keep planet's temperature from average temperature of increasing no more than 2 degrees C. Well, we've already blown through, we're close to blowing through 1.5, so we only got half a degree C to mess with, as wiggle room, and that's not much. Okay, even if the nations were able to keep their promise to 2 degrees C, unlikely, especially now with the recent IPCC report, where it basically said we need to do something by 2030. That's basically 11 years away, and for the IPCC to issue such a dire report, where they are known to really lowball, underestimate everything, and they don't even include methane in their reports, which is something that really ticks me off. So for them to issue this kind of a dire warning, things are bad. So even if the countries can stay to this 2 degrees, there's enough thermal inertia in the system that temperatures will continue to rise. And with that, well, Earth will be changing, and even be visibly changing. Sea levels could rise by 6 meters. You've seen me do reports on this before in the past. Large tracts of the polar ice caps could collapse. On the good side, the Sahara could become greener. Or become green, period. The edges of what are now tropical forests could turn into savanna, which means if you have grasslands, there's less drawdown of carbon dioxide than what trees would draw down. So that allows more CO2 to persist in the atmosphere. That's not good. And of course, savannas, tend to be subject to regular outbreaks of fire, as do temperate forests. Tropical forests, it's damp, fairly damp places that they're at less risk for damaging fires. The northern forest could move 200 kilometers nearer the North Pole, and ahead of them the tundra. I just did a video segment where I talked about in Alaska how the flora and fauna are moving north. This is in a more general term, but that's the same idea. That is what will happen if the past is a guide to what's going on in the present. Okay. 3 times in the last 3.5 million years, the temperature of the planet went up. It went up to 2 degrees Celsius higher than temperatures that humans have been living with for the past 2,000 years. And all 3 times, the global climate changed in response. What is less certain is the rate of change. How many times have I mentioned that the key thing is the rate of change? I actually just was in a bit of a Twitter war recently where some tool was basically saying it's all BS and that you scientists are going to say this stuff because you have your funding to protect, to blah, blah, blah. And then this person started throwing this little anecdotal nonsense out there. And so I was nice at first on basically saying, well, that is anecdotal. It's not it does not disprove anything. Tried to relate a concept of a statistical outlier. I guess that was too much for that person to take. And I basically said, it's the rate of change. Nowhere in Earth's history have we seen this rate of change, this rapid increase in temperature, and for that matter, CO2 levels. But he kept saying, well, the Earth has cycled before. Yes, it has. the rate of change. That's the key point. And then I went on to say, as far as keeping a vested, keep a funding coming in, we're dealing with an anti-science Congress. They want to cut off our funding. So if we were to, if we really wanted to guarantee our funding, we would be putting out BS reports and they say, oh, nothing's going on. Humans aren't doing a darn thing. And I say, okay, here's your money. Keep going. But no, we have intellectual integrity. We collect our data, we analyze as best we can, we report our findings. That's it. So at that point, he then made some personal attacks on me. And he even said, you won't listen to my alternative facts. Excuse me? Alternative facts. Now that's when I kind of sent a salvo back, and basically saying, how stupid can you be to say alternative fact? Facts are fact. There's no such thing as alternative. Oh, there's this fact and then there's this fact. No, one is true. Not this one and this one and this one. Now, they may be possibilities, but that's not facts. Possibilities that are yet to play out, but facts are facts. As an example, warmer air holds more moisture. What's the alternative to that? It doesn't hold more moisture? Come on. So, yeah, once that person said alternative facts, I knew he was an idiot. And I basically called him out on that, and he got a little bent out of shape, like a little snowflake, and I blocked him at that point. But it's just like, no, and I also told him, opinions are not facts. And I then told him and said, well, go to school, get a PhD, have 25 plus years of field experience, and then we can have a discussion. And the thing is, don't forget, Exxon knew back in 1974, I mentioned this in my Twitter war, they knew back in 1974 that human burning of fossil fuels is adding CO2 to the atmosphere and would warm the planet. They knew in 74. They knew this. The documents are there to prove this. They chose to embark on a campaign of denial and disinformation. And a lot of people have, unfortunately, including this turkey I was dealing with, have bought into it. It's almost akin to, oh, cigarette smoking doesn't cause cancer. In fact, the same scientists who said cigarette smoking doesn't cause cancer were the same ones that basically said, oh, climate change ain't happening. It ain't human activity. So Exxon knew back in 74 that this was a fact, and they chose to basically be dishonest with the public. So, yeah, alternative facts? Yeah, no, there's no such thing. There are facts, and then there are non-facts. So, as I said, the rate of change is the key to understanding all of this. So we have 6-meter rise in sea levels, from the melting of the glaciers and the Greenland and Antarctic ice caps, as well as thermal expansion. You've heard me discuss with you before that not only meltwater adds to sea level, melting the glaciers and so forth, but that you heat the water up, heated things expand. That's another fact. Alternative, heated objects shrink? No. Except for water from 0 to 4C. Remember, because when water cools down, fresh water is most dense at 4 degrees C. As it cools down to freezing, it actually expands. That's because of the nature of the polar covalent bonds, and that's why ice floats. That's one of the that's like the only exception to that. When you heat something up, or when you cool something down, it shrinks. But of course, once it gets colder than 0, it keeps shrinking. Now, seawater, because of the solutes in there, the salinity, if you're going from 4C to 0C, it keeps shrinking because seawater does not freeze at 0C. It will freeze at, depending on the salinity content, typically from -3 to -6 or -7 C. So typically it's about a -3 to -5 on average, but that's seawater. And again, when it does freeze, you have brine rejection, so it increases the density of the seawater that remains, and then the ice float is salt-free. You can actually melt that and drink it. So, but it's always the thermal expansion from heating the water as well as adding glacial input that will increase sea levels. Now, typically, to have a 6-meter rise in the past would take about several thousands of years to happen. Well, we're now seeing it going faster because humans can do so in 1 to 2 centuries, 1 to 200 years. So we're talking about an order of magnitude time. That's significant. And the thing is, of course, once you get that inertia going, it's difficult to stop it or reverse it. All geology is based on an axiom that the present is the key to the past, as well as the past is the key to the present. And you putting these two together, we can then predict the future or make our best guesstimates, estimations for what will come in the future. So this is a report in the journal Nature Geoscience that we're looking at these 3 events of 2 degrees C warming or so. One of these began at the close of the Ice Age 9,000 to 5,000 years ago. One between the last 2 ice ages, 129,000 to 116,000 years ago, and one from a warm period known as the Mid-Pliocene, 3.3 to 3 million years ago. The first 2 were responses to subtle but predictable shifts in the planet's orbit. The oldest of these warmings were driven by the increase of CO2 in the atmosphere to between 350 and 450 parts per million. These are levels that match those of today. We're about at 411, 421, somewhere around there. The research raises questions about the completeness of the climate models now used by scientists to predict future change. Basically, what they're implying here is that the current models are actually underestimating. And scientists have a tendency to actually be on the conservative side in putting forth possibilities of the future. They tend to underestimate. Only then we get more data and kind of realize, oh shit, we need to revise these and it's worse than we thought. Now, just a quick note about the subtle predictable shifts in the planet's orbit. That's a reference to the Milankovitch cycles. Basically changes in the eccentricity of the planet's orbit, going from nearly circular to not quite so circular. The eccentricity doesn't change that much, but it's enough. Changes in the precession as well as tilt of the axis. And I will be putting together a video on discussing the Milankovitch cycles. I will get to it. And when I'm basically looking for really good graphics and stuff like that, as opposed to just talking about it. If I can show graphics with the change and so on, it's better to visualize it. Then you can see how the heat distribution does vary. That will then affect the climate. So I'm really trying to hunt down some really good graphics for that, but that is coming. Excuse me. So as ice retreats, vegetation cover changes, so does the movement of carbon between organisms and the abiotic environment, rocks, ocean, atmosphere, soil, so forth. And the difficulty for climate modelers is that, okay, we're trying to model these things here, but you don't know what nations are doing, and the nations have kind of been slow to get to action here. Now, I have a story upcoming right after this one here. Where I'm going to talk about what's China doing. And China's taken some positive steps. Not the U.S., Trumpty Dumpty pulled out of the Paris Accord. Because right now, the attitude is, and even with the IPCC report notwithstanding, fossil fuel is still business as usual. So so climate models have to now go with that assumption of business as usual and work that into their modeling efforts. Climate model predictions do seem to be trustworthy when looking at small changes over just the upcoming several decades. But it's worrisome that these models likely underestimate climate change under higher emission scenarios, such as the business as usual, and especially over longer timescales. That is a statement from Katrine Meissner of the University of New South Wales in Australia. Hubertus Fischer of the University of Bern in Switzerland, who led the study, said, observations of past warming periods suggest that a number of amplifying mechanisms which are poorly represented in climate models increase long-term warming beyond climate model projections. Another way of saying we're underestimating right now. This suggests the carbon budget to avoid 2 degrees Celsius warming may be far smaller than estimated, leaving very little margin of error to meet the Paris targets. So basically, aggressive action needs to be undertaken, and we're not seeing it. Now, climate change is, pressing. George Carlin did a routine about the planet will be fine. It will be here, and so on. And he's correct. Earth will continue on. Earth will recover. The whole issue is what it's doing to humans. And humans have altered the biosphere in ways that is unprecedented. Hence the reason why we now live in what is now called the Anthropocene era. Humans are drastically affecting our planet, noticeably changing it. And not to mention the 6th mass extinction that is directly due to our actions. So, time is running out. That's just to put it bluntly, for humans. Thank you for your time. We'll talk soon. Hello folks, this is Jim asking for your help. I want to grow this channel significantly. I want to increase the number of people who subscribe to my channel. I want to increase the number of people who are supporting patrons on Patreon for this channel. Patreon.com/Science Talk with Jim Massa. I do not receive funding of any sort from anyone. So the information I share with you is the information as found published in the peer-reviewed journals. No propaganda, no BS, just the science, and of course I give you my interpretations and analyses based on my experience as a scientist. So please tell others of the work I do here, tell others of my channel. Share my videos, post them on other social media platforms. But we need to disseminate this information to more and more people, to a wider audience. And I need your help in doing that. For those of you who are already patrons and support me on Patreon, thank you. Thank you for your support and continued support. Together we can do this. So you'll find details in the description box below how to support me on Patreon. And thank you. Thank you for your help. Thank you for your continued support. It does mean a lot to me. We can do this.